Right now, a tiny parasite is making thousands of Americans sick with explosive diarrhea, and for weeks, nobody could say where it was coming from. Well, today that finally changed. Investigators pointed to the lettuce from one single company called Taylor Farms, and once you see how much of our food quietly runs through that one company, you'll understand why this outbreak spread to so many states so fast. There's also a major twist here. The lettuce may not actually be the source. It may already be in our water, according to an infectious disease specialist writing today in Forbes. And that question, what is actually in our water, and the water that our food is grown with, leads you somewhere to somewhere you'd never expect, including these giant data centers that are powering AI models like ChatGPT. So in this video, I'm going to help you learn which foods are completely safe for you to keep eating right now, plus a simple cutting mistake that most people are making without even knowing it. Stuff like that can protect your family this week. Then I'm going to get into the bigger story, how our food and water systems got this fragile, and why the people who are supposed to catch these outbreaks keep falling behind. I'm also going to answer two questions that I get from most worried families. You know, do these old herbal remedies people use for parasites actually do anything? And if you take no medicine at all, can your body beat this on its own? The answers are genuinely reassuring. Every one of these topics is here for a single reason: to keep the people you love out of a hospital bed this summer. So, if you have an older parent or a spouse that's going through cancer treatment, or a friend who eats a lot of veggies and salads, share this video with them right now. I'm Dr. Thomas, a Johns Hopkins and NIH-funded caregiving researcher and the CEO of CARE-IA. I've helped thousands of families navigate aging, dementia, and serious illness. I'm not a clinician, but a leading researcher and innovator in caregiving, and also a caregiver myself. And when an outbreak like this hits the people that we care for, the older, the immunocompromised, my job is to help you keep them safe. Now let's get into it. For weeks, I think the strangest thing about this outbreak was the silence. Thousands of people sick, no source. Well, that may have just changed. As of today, this recording, investigators have linked these illnesses to shredded iceberg lettuce supplied by one company, Taylor Farms, and served at some Taco Bell locations across Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky. You know, here's a caveat before the accusation, because this is a kind of moment, you know, where I think the facts really matter. This link comes from a source close to the investigation, and it was reported by the Washington Post and CNN, but not yet an official government confirmation. And as of today, no formal recall had been issued. Taco Bell says health officials have not confirmed any link to a specific ingredient or supplier, and that are already proactively removed some of these items as a precaution. But I would treat this as a strong lead, just not yet a verdict. Remember, in our first video, I told you the story about how everyone blamed California strawberries in the 1996 outbreak, and then it really turned out to be Guatemalan raspberries. Sometimes, in a fast-moving illness like this, we don't know the verdict, so we don't want to rush to conclude. But here's what's not in dispute, and I researched this extensively: who Taylor Farms is, and that part should scare us. You may think you've never bought their product in your life. Well, unfortunately, you almost certainly have. Taylor Farms is the largest producer of fresh-cut salads and vegetables in North America. It's a multi-billion-dollar corporation that's churning out well over 165 million servings every single week from the Salinas Valley of California, the place they call the salad bowl of the world. They don't just sell it under their own name. They also quietly pack the store-brand salads for Walmart, Kroger, Costco, Trader Joe's, and they supply the shredded greens for McDonald's, Chipotle, Subway, and Taco Bell. Think about that. Peel back the labels in your own grocery aisle, and a startling share of them lead back to one company's processing lines. I think it's not a scandal by itself, but I do think it's a vulnerability, and it has a name that people use in engineering: a single point of failure. When one supplier feeds dozens of brands, a single contaminated batch doesn't just sit in one restaurant. it can see an outbreak across 30 states before anyone can connect the dots, because the sick people ate at totally different places. So how did this one company get so big? Well, simple, by buying nearly everyone else. Taylor Farms absorbed Earthbound Farm, the organic salad giant. It swallowed the maker of Eat Smart, the brand. It bought up salad plants in Germany, leafy green suppliers in Britain. What used to be a crowded field full of competitors is now a handful: Taylor Farms, Dole, and Fresh Express. They control the entire grocery shelf. Economists call an oligopoly. Consumers just think about as the salad aisle. I personally think when a market gets. That concentrated one hygiene lapse in one plant becomes a national event. Now, does this company have a checkered past? I think it has a documented one. In 2024, an E. coli outbreak tied to McDonald's Quarter Pounders sickened over 100 people and was linked to a death of an older adult in Colorado. Investigators traced the infected onions to a Taylor Farms plant. An FDA inspection of that facility afterward documented real failures in sanitation monitoring and follow-up. Those facts are on the record, so the company's track record on safety is worth scrutinizing, even though some people may say it's due to its size, and that'll inevitably have outbreaks. I think the bigger question here isn't about one company at all, but about concentration of power. When a food system consolidates this much, the giants gain enormous influence over the rules that govern them. Food and agriculture interests have spent heavily lobbying Washington, D.C. every single year, and industry groups have often pushed successfully to delay food safety measures. The very rule designed to let investigators trace a tainted food back to its source quickly, that was pushed back by about 30 months recently. Federal foreign inspection numbers have hit a historic low. I'm not saying who to blame here, but I'm telling you the structure, that fewer companies with more concentrated power leads to slower oversight and an outbreak that's already taking weeks to get a name. If you like the story underneath the story and that's why you're here, please subscribe, because this is exactly the stuff I love digging into, and I hope this helps inform people. Now the waterborne story. Some people say the source may not be the lettuce at all, but it may be what the lettuce drank. So in my last video, I told you about a leading food scientist, Dr. Donald Schaffner at Rutgers, who noticed these cases clustering really hard around Lake Erie, like all over Michigan and Ohio, and suggested that the outbreak looks more waterborne than foodborne. Today, that theory got a serious boost. Dr. Judy Stone, writing in Forbes this morning, laid out the case bluntly that it's water, not produce. Likely driving an outbreak like this, she anchored in an interesting number. About 45% of the irrigation water used on American crops is surface water, the kind that sits exposed to leaking septic tanks and failing sewer systems. Sit with that, with what that means for a second. If the water sprayed on a field carries this parasite, then the lettuce versus water debate is like a false choice right now. The water is simply how the parasite climbed into the lattice. A former FDA food safety official, Frank Yanis, put it plainly that the role of water in spreading this parasite is underestimated, and water often serves as a pipeline that contaminates produce. So what if these two rival theories may be the same story, just told in different ways? None of this is new, by the way, in the signs of disease. I think it's one of the oldest lessons we have in infectious disease. An interesting story, back in 1854, cholera was tearing through the Soho district of London, and the prevailing theory then blamed the bad air. Well, a physician named John Snow didn't buy it. He mapped the deaths house by house in London and watched them cluster around a single public water pump on Broad Street. He couldn't see a germ because they didn't know about that yet, but the pattern was undeniable. So he convinced the officials to remove the pump handle, cut off the water, and the entire cholera outbreak in London collapsed. That single act is considered the birth of modern epidemiology. John Snow proved that disease can ride invisibly in clean-looking water, and if you follow the pattern, you can totally stop it. So now here we are, a couple 100 years later, watching a scientist map out cases around Lake Erie, and it reminds me of what John Snow did back then to stop that epidemic in London in the 1800s. I think we've also relearned the lesson painfully in our own lifetime. In 1993, the city of Milwaukee had one of the worst waterborne outbreaks in American history from its treated municipal drinking water. A parasite called Cryptosporidium, that's a cousin of the one we're discussing right now, slipped through the filtration system. Estimated 400,000 people got sick, which is more than half the population on that water system, by the way, and thousands were hospitalized, dozens died, and most of them, were people whose immune systems were already fragile. That was treated tap water, so that's how easily a microscopic parasite can defeat the systems that we assume are protecting us. By the way, there is pushback to this theory. The state of Michigan, the officials have still leaned toward produce and are disputing that there's no water sample in this outbreak that's tested positive yet. So I personally think the water theory is a strong and credible hypothesis, but not proven fact. The safe takeaway for you here, though, is if you're living in affected regions this summer, don't swallow lake or pond water. Know that a swimming pool of chlorine won't reliably kill this parasite either. So if you're caring for someone immunocompromised, maybe lean on bottled or filtered water for a while. It'll buy you peace of mind. Also, an interesting part I did not see coming and want to handle this carefully here because the internet is running wild with theories. Data centers. Last month in Wyoming, city water officials made a bizarre discovery. A data center affiliated with Meta, one of those enormous warehouses that's full of computers that power artificial intelligence. That data center had flushed its cooling system with water and dumped that water into the city's sewer. And in that water, testing turned up a rare disease or drug-resistant bacterium that officials say they don't even test for normally. The city shut down the data centers, discharged immediately, and banned the practice for every data center in town. It's very scary, and let me explain what that means in practical terms, because it revealed something bigger. When one of these massive data center facilities first powers up, it fills its cooling pipes with water and then flushes them. Engineers call it fill and flush. So, picture running the tap hard through brand new plumbing to clear it out. That flush water has to go somewhere, and in Cheyenne, it went straight into the municipal system that feeds a plant, which then sprays reclaimed water on parks and green spaces and turns it into a fine mist that people breathe. Officials worried about exactly that. The caveat here, though, is that the bug found in Wyoming is a bacterium, not this cyclospora parasite, behind this outbreak. And to be clear, there's no evidence yet connecting the data center, or any data center, to the illnesses we're talking about. So, why am I bringing this up at all? Because I think it's a real illustration of the real problem that's going on. Under the water theory, we have almost no idea what's going under our shared water systems, and the people supposed to watch this are being outrun. Officials said this isn't something we even normally test for in that data center case. I think across America, data centers are being built at breakneck speed, and they consume staggering amounts of water for cooling. And regulators are totally behind on this. When our capacity to monitor our water that's feeding our people falls behind the things we're putting into it, we're going to get blind spots, and I think blind spots are where outbreaks happen, public health risks hide. That's a real lesson. Not that an AI data center is giving you diarrhea, but that nobody's fully watching the water that we all drink. Share this with anyone who doesn't realize data center facilities have public health risks that people know about. I think this is something worth thinking about. Now, enough with the theories. Let's turn to protecting your family. I covered the core rules in the first 2 videos, so I'll keep the recap here. Heat is your only weapon. Cook to about 158 degrees. Kill this parasite. Washing chlorine rinses, vinegar, even your freezer, that stuff doesn't reliably kill this parasite. But here's a fresh, practical part that almost nobody in the media is saying, the list of foods you can keep eating with confidence. So anything you cook obviously is safe, but also anything you peel. If you can peel it, it's essentially safe. Bananas, oranges, avocados, melons. The parasite can cling to the outside, but you're throwing that outside part away. Commercially frozen produce has not yet been linked to a cyclospora case, so keep that in mind. And neither has cooked food, neither has peeled fruit, so it's not a small consolation, but you are getting a lot of your, kitchen back. But also keep in mind there's a technique inside the peeling that matters enormously, and I almost never hear it mentioned. Scrub the rind before you cut. Think about a cantaloupe. If you slice straight through the skin with your knife, and if the parasite is riding on that surface, your blade now is just going to carry it straight from the outside, straight into the sweet flesh that you're about to eat. So then the peel didn't protect you because the knife just defeated it. So, clear rule, wash and scrub the outside of anything like melons, cucumbers, any hard rind. Wash it under running water first, and then cut it. That washing closes a door of risk that many people might not even realize is open. Now, reassurance I want to give most caregivers, because it'll remove a layer of fear. This parasite only affects humans, only us. It cannot live in a cow, a chicken, a pig, or a fish. So it means two things. First, your meat is not a source of this outbreak. This is a produce and water parasite, so cook your veggies safely for the usual reasons, but you don't need to fear if you eat steak or chicken breast the way that you'd fear a raw salad. And then, second, this eases a real worry in homes with pets. Your dog and your cat cannot catch this, and they can't give it to you, so you will not get it from your animals. And they will not get it from the person living at home. So in a house that's already stretched thin by anxiety, I think crossing these anxieties off the list can be a genuine relief for people. Now here's a bunch of other questions flooding my inbox from very curious people among you, and I love these questions, by the way. In the last video, I walked through the science on berberine and researcher Tu Youyou, the Chinese scientist who won the Nobel Prize for studying the herb wormwood. So many of you ask the deeper question. Why do ancient cultures reach for herbs against parasites in the first place, and do any of these natural remedies hold up? I think that story deserves its own segment, and I spent a bunch of time researching this. I've covered the antibiotic that are already working in some of the earlier videos, so this part is purely for the curious, and for those of you who may not be able to take the standard treatment or have allergies and want to understand every possible avenue for treatment. So, also just so nobody misunderstands, there is no human study yet showing any of these herbs treat cyclospora. But what I'm going to talk about is history and biology. This isn't a prescription. But with that in mind, it's a fascinating story. For thousands of years, traditional Chinese medicine and Indian Ayurveda both built entire categories of treatment around expelling parasites. In Ayurveda, they called the whole class of parasitic illnesses krimi, like Krimi, and the classic remedy was a plant called Vidanga, along with neem. That's a tree so bitter and so central to Indian medicine that it's called the village pharmacy. When facing parasites in China, traditional medicine reached for wormwood, garlic, and areca. Now, why these plants across cultures? That often never spoke to each other. Here's the beautiful part of history. Plants can't run from the insects and worms that eat them. So, over millions of years, plants evolved chemical weapons, bitter, pungent, slightly toxic compounds meant to poison their own parasites. Ancient humans, just through nothing but trial and error and generations of observation, learned to borrow those plant weapons and turn them against the parasites that infect us. They may not have known about the detailed chemistry, but they knew the pattern, and I think there was real folk wisdom doing real science that just without the modern vocabulary that we use. And it brings me to the discovery that several of you have flagged, and it's the most interesting item on my desk this week: turmeric. Some recent research has come out circulating about how turmeric may be an effective weapon against cyclospora-like parasites. So I dug into it. The compound that makes turmeric golden is called curcumin. You know that's the spice in your curry. The cyclospora parasite has a very close cousin called Diarrhea. That's the parasite that causes a similar disease in chickens, and they're such close relatives that scientists literally use Diarrhea in the lab as a stand-in for cyclospora, which is nearly impossible to grow otherwise. And in study after study, but in test tubes and in poultry, not in humans, curcumin from turmeric has shown real activity in fighting Diarrhea. It damages the parasite's infectious stage in a dish. It infected chickens and improved survival, and reduced the parasite spread. So what I find generally compelling here is the why. Researchers have proposed a real mechanism here. Curcumin appears to hit the parasite with oxidative stress. Think of that as a chemical rust that overwhelms the parasite's own repair systems, and that makes it harder for the parasite to invade the cells that are lining the gut. It really seems to attack the bug and also shore up the host defenses at the same time. I think it's a really interesting and plausible biological reason that these effects can show up. But I also have to caveat this heavily that so far this is just animal and test tube data in a cousin parasite, not in the real one that's circulating right now and not yet proven in a single human being. So it may be a promising mechanism and may be a reason to run a human trial quickly, but it's not necessarily a reason to swap a proven treatment for a spice jar. So I just think the value here is understanding and appreciating that our grandmothers weren't foolish, and even modern research labs today keep finding real chemistry hiding inside these ancient remedies. I personally think that wisdom of our ancestors is worth respecting and worth studying alongside modern medicine. You know, if this type of balance of curiosity and honesty is what you came here for, please subscribe and share with others, because I hope to keep sharing balanced perspectives to help you think and better protect your loved ones. So now, to understand why this bug behaves so strangely, you have to understand what it even is. Because parasite, bacteria, and virus are words that I hear often getting tossed around like synonyms, but they're wildly different creatures. So let me make it simple. A virus barely counts as alive. It's just a scrap of genetic code in a protective shell, and it can't do anything on its own. It's like a burglar with no tools. It breaks into your cells and forces your own machinery to build copies of it. Think about those are things like the flu or COVID. A bacterium is a genuine living cell, small, simple, but fully alive with its own machinery. It can eat, grow, and multiply on its own, sometimes even doubling every 20 minutes. That's things like strep throat, E. coli that we talked about. A parasite like cyclospora is a totally different order of thing entirely. It's not a scrap, and it's not a simple cell. It's a complex, complete organism with a cell nucleus, much like our own, and a genuine life cycle with distinct stages. It's almost closer on the family tree of life to us than to a bacterium. Parasitism turns out to be one of the most successful survival strategies on Earth, and it evolved over and over across totally different branches of life because letting another creature do the work of keeping you alive is evolutionary. I think a brilliant cheat, and that complexity is exactly why this parasite plays by rules that you know are dangerous. Remember from our earlier video, when cyclospora leaves the body, it isn't ready to infect anyone yet. Well, this is interesting. It has to sit out in the world, in soil, or on a leaf, or in water, for 1 to 2 weeks to mature before it can make the next person sick. By comparison, a virus like neurovirus is contagious. The instant leaves your body, which is why it was like exploding through nursing homes overnight. Thankfully, cyclospora can't do that. Its own complicated life cycle forces a delay that makes person-to-person spread essentially impossible, and I think that reassures caregivers out there. It makes it the same thing that makes it a complicated organism, keeps it from jumping from person to person. So that leads to the question I get the most from families weighing whether or not to even see a doctor. If we do nothing, will the body just clear it? And the answer on that is reassuring, with a caveat that I also need you to hear. In a healthy person, yes, you will clear it. The immune system usually wins on its own and defeats a parasite like this. Here's roughly how. The parasite stays in your gut. It doesn't invade the bloodstream or spread through the body in someone with normal defenses. It sets up in the lining of your small intestine. Then your immune system, led by specialized cells that patrol that lining, recognize the invader, mount a response, and gradually clear it out. Human bodies have been fighting gut parasites for thousands of years, as long as there have been humans. So nature has given us the means to fight back, but here is the caveat, and it's the reason that actual treatments exist. The body wins on its own. You know that can mean a miserable, relapsing. You know weeks of watery diarrhea that sometimes can even drag out for a month. You know, fading then coming back, fading then coming back. For a healthy 40-year-old, I think that can be a really awful month that you might want to cut short, but for a frail 80-year-old, those same weeks aren't just unpleasant. They could be totally dangerous because the real threat wasn't just the parasite. It could also be the dehydration that comes with that. This is why doctors are often recommending treatment for basically everyone, not because your body can't win, but because winning slowly and taking the risk could cost a vulnerable person way too much along the way, and especially in someone whose immune system is really compromised, the body may not be able to clear it at all without help. So then this can stretch on for months on end and lead to much more health problems. So I think my personal takeaway here is balance and nuance. A healthy immune system is a remarkable thing of nature and may likely beat this on its own given weeks. But for the older, the frail, the immunocompromised, the people this channel exists for, and even for many of us, weeks aren't exactly, that's not something you want to gamble. Push fluids, watch for the warning signs, seek treatment or advice from your doctor, and do not wait it out alone. Now let's think about what we've covered here. A single company, Taylor Farms, at the center of an investigation because our food system funnels through fewer and fewer hands. A water supply that no one's really watching fully. From all the way back from a London pump in 1854 to a Wyoming data center last month. Ancient plants hiding real chemistry that we're only now decoding, and a human body given the chance that still knows how to defend itself. The thread connecting all of this is the same one that John Snow found in 1854 in London. Pay attention to the patterns around you, and you can protect the people you love, even if the institutions meant to protect us are falling a step behind. Hopefully, you now know more than most people will ever hear on the news. You'll know which foods are safe, why the steak and the dog are totally fine, why to scrub the rind before cutting it with a knife, why this parasite can't spread from the person you're caring for to you. Knowledge like that only matters if it travels. So please do two things that can keep this work alive and keep the community safe. Subscribe so you can get these briefings before the headlines catch up, and share this with 3 people right now. Your friend who eats, who's still eating raw veggies, someone you know going through cancer treatment whose body can't take a hit right now, and the parent or grandparent whose age simply puts them most at risk. 3 people you can protect in less than a couple minutes just because you cared enough to send this. For anything that you can't handle alone, there is help out there, and it's free and real. The CDC and the FDA outbreak pages have verified information and real-time updates. Foodsafety.gov for recalls. 211 for local support. Elder Care Locator 1, 800-677-1116 connects families to meals, in-home help, and caregiver support since the early 1990s. Pay attention to what's going on as this develops and ask the hard questions. If you're fighting this, please stay hydrated and make sure that you have support. And please check in on the people who are maybe too proud or too tired to check in on themselves. This is Dr. Thomas. Please take care of yourself. Take care of your loved ones, and I'll see you in the next one.